Hi, my name is Ocean, and a few months ago, my father poured boiling tea on my lap because I said no. No to co-signing a car loan for my unemployed uncle. No to being the family's financial punching bag. No to pretending that silence was love. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came after, the way no one flinched. Not my mother, not my sister. The way they just sat there like I deserved it, like I'd broken some unspoken code by finally saying enough. They called me ungrateful, said I abandoned them, posted a photo without me, filed a lawsuit. But what they didn't know, I still held the deed. I kept the receipts. So what happens when the quiet one finally fights back? I was halfway through my second cup of lukewarm coffee when my phone buzzed. The office was quiet, just the usual keyboard taps and the low hum of the HVAC. I glanced at the screen and saw my dad's name. The message was short, blunt, and lacked anything resembling a greeting. Grayson needs a car loan co-signed, $15K. He's found a decent one. Let me know by tonight. That was it. No how are you, no explanation, no question mark. Just another command slipped into my day like it was part of my job description. My jaw tightened. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and stared out the window at the brown leaves drifting along the curb. Late autumn in Eugene always carried a kind of wet silence, like the weather itself was bracing for something harder. I guess I was too. I'd lost count of how many times I'd been the fixer. Zinnia needed help with her credit card debt. I covered it. Grayson couldn't make rent for the fourth time in a year. I sent over a wire. Dad's prescriptions lapsed because insurance wouldn't cover the full amount. I paid the difference. Quietly. Always quietly. I was the youngest, and somehow that had translated into being the most responsible. While Zinnia chased followers and brand deals on Instagram and Grayson floated between career resets, I kept my head down. I climbed the corporate ladder. I paid my bills. I bought a modest condo, took care of my health, and never once made my family feel small for needing help. But that help had stopped being temporary a long time ago. By the time I left work, the sun had already dipped behind a blanket of gray clouds. The air was sharp with the kind of chill that makes you wish you'd grabbed a heavier coat. I didn't bother changing. I went straight to my parents' house. Mom had texted earlier. Dinner at 7, nothing fancy. Just us. Yeah, just us, and whatever ambush they'd cooked up this time. Their home looked the same as always, white siding in need of repainting, the porch light flickering slightly. Familiar, deceptively so. When I stepped inside, the smell of roast chicken and sage hit me like a childhood memory I wasn't ready for. Lorraine, my mother, was plating dinner with her usual grace, humming some hymn I didn't recognize. Zinnia sat at the end of the table, hair curled, nails done, wearing a pastel sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Grayson was already seated, fidgeting with the cloth napkin like it owed him money. Dad stood at the head of the table. Ocean, he said, nodding. No hug, no smile. I sat. The plate in front of me was already served. That wasn't normal. We started eating. Grace was said, by Dad, of course, and small talk was exchanged. Mom complimented the turkey. Zinnia talked about a new collab with a wellness brand. Grayson stayed quiet, except for a few fake chuckles that didn't quite reach his eyes. Then Dad cleared his throat. So, Grayson's found a car, he said casually, reaching for more potatoes. A used Camry, clean, dependable. He's got a lead, but he needs a co-signer. I didn't speak. I knew this wasn't a conversation. It was a setup. Dad kept going. He's working on getting back on his feet. This'll help. The seller can't hold it past Friday. I looked around. A pen lay next to a folded document on the sideboard. Subtle. Not subtle. Zinnia smiled tightly. It's not that big a deal, really, just a formality. Grayson finally chimed in. I mean, you're the one who's got the credit, sis. I just need a little leverage. My eyes locked on the paper. I didn't even need to read it. I knew what it said, what it meant, and I knew what saying no would cost me. I took a breath. What happens if he doesn't pay? That silenced the room. Dad's fork froze mid-air. Zinnia looked at Mom, who suddenly found her mashed potatoes fascinating. Grayson shifted. I will. That's not an answer, I replied. Dad's voice dropped. We're a family, Ocean. We help each other. That's what we do. I've helped, I said, my voice steady. More than once. But this is a legal obligation. If he defaults, it's on me. Mom spoke softly. It's just paperwork. I shook my head. It's not just paperwork when it's tied to my name, my credit, my future. Zinnia's smile evaporated. You've changed. I looked straight at her. No, I'm just finally saying it out loud. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was worse. It was cold, calculated, like I'd just broken some sacred code. Dad pushed back his chair and stood. Excuse me. He walked out of the room. The door to the kitchen swung shut behind him. I reached for my glass of water, hands slightly trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of years pressing against my ribs. I was done being quiet, done being convenient. Then I heard it, the sound of the kettle starting to whistle, not the microwave, not a glass of water being poured, boiling, on the stove. Zinnia picked at her nails. You know, Grayson's really been trying this time. You could cut him some slack. I didn't answer. My eyes stayed on the kitchen door. A few seconds later, Dad returned. In his hand was a teacup. He placed it on the table, and the look in his eyes wasn't disappointment. It was warning. He set the teacup down like it was just another dish on the table. Calm, ordinary. The porcelain tapped softly against the wood, but it rang in my ears louder than anything anyone had said all night. Then he reached for the kettle, still hissing low from the stove. I barely had time to process what was happening before the scalding liquid splashed across my thighs. It wasn't a full pour. He didn't throw it like a mug in a bar fight, but it was intentional, a firm tilt of his wrist, slow enough to prove a point, fast enough to catch me off guard. The tea soaked through my jeans in an instant, the heat biting into my skin, crawling up toward my stomach like fire had been released inside my body. I gasped, sharp, involuntary, but didn't scream. Reflex kept me seated, pride kept me still. Zinnia let out a startled, "Oh," like she was watching someone knock over a wine glass, not burn their daughter. Grayson muttered something under his breath I didn't catch, and Lorraine, my mother, just blinked twice and whispered, "That was an accident." I looked around. No one moved. No one offered a towel or ice or even eye contact. The pain bloomed under my skin, red hot and undeniable, but what stung more was the stillness. The calculated choice every person in that room made to do nothing. I stood up slowly. My chair creaked. The air in the dining room had thickened, like even the walls were waiting to see if I'd explode. But I didn't. Instead, I walked out of the dining room, each step making the wet denim chafe against my thighs. And my mother called out, "Ocean, don't overreact," but her voice was quiet, unconvincing, like she didn't really want me to hear her. The hallway was dim, the single overhead light flickering again. I turned into the small downstairs bathroom and shut the door behind me. Not slamming it, just a firm click, like I needed it to know it was the only thing between me and the people who had just watched me get burned, and said nothing. I yanked down my jeans with shaky fingers. The fabric clung to my skin, and when I peeled it away, I winced. Angry red welts had already started to rise. I crouched to the tile floor, legs shaking, and reached for the faucet. The water ran cold, thankfully. I wet a hand towel and pressed it gently against my thigh, trying to bite back the pain. My breathing slowed, but only barely. There were no footsteps outside the door, no knock, no apology slipped beneath the frame. They weren't worried. They weren't coming. And somehow, that hurt more than the burns. I sat on the floor for a long time, watching droplets slide from the towel into a small puddle on the tile. I remembered a nurse once telling me that silence was a survival instinct. Animals stay quiet when they're injured, she said, to avoid predators. I guess I'd been quiet my whole life. But this wasn't instinct anymore. It was tradition, and I was done with it. My mind drifted back, years, maybe decades. I was 12, and I'd fallen during PE class, landed hard on my wrist. The school nurse called home. I still remember holding the phone with the ice pack taped to my arm, listening as she explained the insurance policy. "She's not on the plan?" the nurse repeated, surprised. Oh, I see. I didn't hear what my father said, but I heard the nurse's voice shift. She handed the phone back to me, her mouth tight. He said, they had to cut extras. Extras. That word had never left me. I wasn't the oldest. I wasn't the favorite. I wasn't the heir. I was just the extra. Useful when needed. Forgotten when not. I looked at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. My hair was messy, the skin around my eyes puffy. I didn't cry, but the anger sat so heavy in my chest, I felt like it might crack my ribs from the inside. I wasn't going to stay for dessert. I wasn't going to stay, period. I rinsed the towel, folded it, and patted my legs dry as best I could. Then I slipped back into my jeans, even though they were still damp, and buttoned them slowly, each motion deliberate. When I opened the door and stepped back into the hallway, no one was waiting. The dining room still buzzed faintly with conversation. Someone laughed, maybe Zinnia. Plates clinked. It was like nothing had happened. I walked past the table. No one looked up. Grayson had already refilled his glass. Lorraine had started clearing the dishes. My father was carving a second helping of chicken. I bent down, picked up my purse from the floor, and slid the strap over my shoulder. My jeans were still soaked. The burn throbbed, but my spine stayed straight. I said nothing. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because they didn't deserve to hear it. The front door creaked slightly as I opened it. The cold air hit me in the face, and for a moment I just stood there, half in, half out. Then I stepped through and closed the door behind me. No one stopped me, not even him, and that silence hurt more than the burn. I didn't sleep much. I lay there on my side, one leg outstretched on top of a folded towel, the other curled up to keep from tugging the raw skin. The burn wasn't as bad as it had felt last night, but it had bubbled under the fabric and left behind a tenderness I couldn't ignore, both on my leg and somewhere deeper, behind my ribs. Morning light crept in through the cracked blinds of my apartment. It didn't feel like a new day. It felt like the continuation of something that should have ended long ago. I sat up slowly, careful not to agitate the wound, and reached for the ointment the pharmacist had given me months ago when I burned my arm cooking. I applied it gently, biting down on a rolled-up corner of my bedsheet to keep from cursing out loud. As I stood, I noticed something. No missed calls. No messages from my father. None from my mother. Not even Zinnia's usual performative, "Are you okay?" texts. My family's silence wasn't a pause, it was a choice. While the kettle warmed for coffee, I checked my phone notifications again. That's when I saw it. One alert from our family group chat. Zinnia Hart sent a video. My thumb hovered over the icon for a second longer than usual. My heart didn't pound. Not exactly. It sat heavy, like it already knew something I didn't. I tapped it open. The video was only 10 seconds long. But I didn't need more than 2 to recognize the grainy angle, the gray metal stall door, and the unmistakable sound of me sobbing. It wasn't from last night. This was older, a few years ago, maybe, back when I had a full-blown panic attack in a bathroom during a family gathering. I'd slipped away quietly, trying to compose myself. Zinnia had followed me, asked if I was okay. I thought she was being kind. Apparently, she had been recording. The clip ended. The caption under it said, "Drama queen always finds her stage." There were laughing emojis from someone. I didn't even bother to see who. A few LOL replies. No one said, "That's not right." No one stood up for me. No one removed the post. I sat there at the kitchen counter, phone in hand, wondering how long I'd been the family's punchline. The worst part wasn't the humiliation. It was the realization that none of them even saw it as wrong. That somehow this wasn't new. It had just gone from subtle to shameless. The silence after my refusal, the burn, the apathy, it was all connected. This wasn't a family waiting for me to come around. This was a machine that only functioned when I stayed quiet, paid up, and didn't ask for anything in return. I closed the group chat, deleted it. Then I stood and walked over to the small filing cabinet near my desk. The bottom drawer hadn't been opened in months. I'd kept it neat, labeled, a little too organized for someone who pretended not to keep receipts. But I did. I always had. Pulling out folders one by one, I laid them across the kitchen table. There were transfer confirmations from the time I paid off Grayson's credit card debt, twice, emails between me and the auto shop when I helped cover Dad's engine repair, hospital bills. I'd paid directly when Mom's insurance didn't cover her procedure last spring, and then the mortgage papers. I'd signed off on refinancing their house in my name. I'd helped them avoid foreclosure. I'd kept that quiet too, because they made me believe it was embarrassing to be the one bailing out her parents. "You know how people talk," Dad had said. I looked over the documents, page by page. This wasn't just money. It was years of my life. It was love offered in the only way I knew how. And it had been met with mockery and silence. A wave of nausea crawled up my throat, not from the burn on my leg, but from the clarity settling into my bones. They didn't respect me. They never had. They just needed what I could give. And when I stopped giving, I became disposable. I walked to my printer and loaded a fresh ream of paper. The machine hummed to life, slow at first, then steady as I began printing copies. Every transaction, every contract, every wire confirmation. I slid each page into a new folder, labeled it Heart Estate, Personal Record. When it was done, I sat down with a yellow sticky note and a ballpoint pen. 2 words. They owe. I pressed it against the front of the folder and stared at it, letting the ink settle like cement over everything I had ignored, excused, forgiven. The next time they called me dramatic or ungrateful or cold, I wouldn't explain. I'd show them this. My phone buzzed again. This time, a message from Zinnia, separate from the group. "You could have just signed the paper, you know. We wouldn't be in this mess." I didn't respond, because we weren't in a mess. They were, and I was finally climbing out of it. Once I'd closed the folder and stuck the yellow note to its cover, the weight of everything I'd unearthed began pressing in on me. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I just sat there, still, breathing as if I'd been holding it in for years. That afternoon, I pulled on a long skirt to cover the burn, grabbed the gift I'd pretended to be excited about, and drove back to the place I hadn't intended to see again so soon, my parents' house. I told myself it was just to drop off the birthday present. That's what I texted Mom. "Swinging by to leave something for Dad." She answered within minutes. "We'll be here." Dinner around 6. Of course she would reply quickly to that. Of course she'd jump at the chance to prove to herself that things were fine. The drive was short but heavy. I had the folder on the passenger seat, though I hadn't decided what I'd do with it. A part of me wanted to walk in and slap it on the table. Another part wasn't ready to let them see what I now knew. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same, but something about it had shifted in my mind. It wasn't home. It was a place where I used to belong, a place that had uninvited me silently, one cut at a time. Lorraine greeted me at the door with a smile that barely reached her eyes. "You look better," she said, her voice brushing past concern like a stranger you nod at in the grocery store. I forced a smile and held up the wrapped box. "Just dropping this off." Figured I'd say hi. She stepped aside, letting me in without a word about what happened days ago. No mention of the tea, no concern about the scalding, not even a glance at my covered leg. Inside, the air was warm and smelled faintly of rosemary and starch. Comfortable, familiar, dangerous. "I'll just leave it in the living room," I said casually, though my pulse had started to climb again. She nodded, already turning toward the kitchen. "I'm starting potatoes. Zinnia should be here soon." I walked past the dining room table, so pristine, so rehearsed, and up the stairs. At the top landing, I hesitated. The door to my old bedroom still had the same brass knob. The paint on the trim was slightly chipped, like always. When I opened the door, I knew immediately it wasn't mine anymore. The walls were beige, no color, no personality. A twin bed sat in the corner, covered in a white comforter that looked like it belonged in a hotel. Boxes lined the wall, each one labeled with Zinnia's handwriting. Photos, linens, holiday decor. The bookshelf was empty. My trophies were gone. So were the certificates, the framed art I did in college, the tiny ceramic bird I'd painted in 3rd grade that Dad once said looked too fragile to touch. On the far wall, perfectly centered, was a framed portrait of Zinnia's wedding day. She was beaming, radiant, glowing in white chiffon. Dad was next to her, proud. Mom clutching flowers. Even Grayson stood in the background, smiling like he belonged. I wasn't in the photo. I had been at that wedding. I'd helped pay for it, but I wasn't there. Not on the wall, not in this room, not in this family. A sound escaped my chest. Not a sob, not even a sigh. Just something low and final. I stepped back into the hallway. My body moved before my mind caught up. Downstairs, Dad's study door was slightly ajar. I nudged it open. The room was dim, curtains drawn. The same mahogany desk sat where it always had. His chair creaked when I leaned in to reach the drawer I knew he always kept locked, except he'd gotten careless. The latch clicked open easily. Inside, folders, more neatly labeled documents. I rifled through until I found one marked estate planning. The first page was a will, dated last year, his signature at the bottom, Lorraine's witness signature beside it. Zinnia, primary beneficiary. Grayson, secondary. My name wasn't anywhere on the page, not even as a witness, not even as in case of emergency. It was as if I had never existed. I scanned further. Property plans, the deed to the house, set to transfer to Zinnia upon their passing. Bank accounts listed in a trust fund bearing Zinnia's and Grayson's names. There were notes about medical directives, funeral wishes, power of attorney. None of it mentioned me. I placed the papers back in the folder carefully, like they were a bomb I'd just disarmed. The study door creaked as I stepped out. I didn't want to stay any longer, but as I reached the front hallway, I heard the screen door swing open. A breeze floated in. "Hey there," came a familiar voice from the porch. I turned. Mabel Jennings, our neighbor from next door, was leaning on the fence, her garden gloves still on. "You visiting?" she asked. "Just dropping something off," I said. Her eyes, sharp for a woman in her late 70s, narrowed slightly. "You've got your mother's jawline. She had that same look the day she left." I paused. "Left?" Mabel nodded slowly. "Back in '99, took off for 2 weeks. Said she needed air. No one talked about it, but I saw her suitcase in the back of the car. She had bruises, high up, where no one would ask questions." I didn't say anything. My hands tightened around the gift bag I still carried. Mabel walked closer to the fence. "Your daddy's temper's never been a secret, hun. Folks just looked the other way. And your mom, she knew, always did. But keeping things tidy meant more than keeping them honest." My throat was dry. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you came back," she said. "But you've got that same look, the one your mama wore when she finally realized love don't mean loyalty, and silence don't mean safety." We stood there, the breeze between us carrying more truth than I could process. I nodded once, just enough for her to know I heard her. She nodded back and turned toward her roses. I walked to the car. The gift bag was still in my hand, crinkled slightly. I placed it in the passenger seat, then paused. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder I'd prepared, the one with the receipts, the documents, the truth. I carried it back to the porch, set it down just inside the front door, and left without ringing the bell. They didn't deserve a performance. They deserved the truth. On paper. Unspoken. I didn't go back inside. I didn't look back. The sound of the screen door closing behind me and the folder tucked just inside it were enough. I left like a shadow fading into dusk, quiet but certain. The drive home was uneventful, almost eerily calm. No traffic, no music, just the rhythmic hum of my tires against pavement and my thoughts spiraling into something sharper than pain, precision. Back at my apartment, I showered, treated the burn on my thigh again, and changed into one of those oversized sweaters you buy during holiday sales thinking it'll feel like comfort. It didn't. I sat cross-legged on my couch, still damp-haired, clutching a warm mug that didn't sting or demand anything from me. And that's when I remembered the paperwork. The legal stuff. The boring but powerful things I'd signed years ago when the house was nearly lost to foreclosure. I rose from the couch, walked to the closet, and pulled out the fireproof box where I kept old tax files, birth certificates, and the dusty folder labeled Heart Mortgage Refi, LLC. I hadn't opened it since the day I signed everything over into my name. At Dad's request, of course. "It's just for the paperwork, sweetheart," he'd said. "They don't give decent interest rates to people our age. You're doing us a favor." It had felt noble then. Family sacrifice. Stepping up. Now it felt like evidence. I opened the folder. There it was. The notarized deed transfer to Ocean Hart, managing member of Hart Legacy Holdings, LLC. The property legally belonged to me, the house they were living in, the one they took photos in front of like I'd never existed. My hands didn't shake, not like they used to. I didn't even blink. The realization came not with fury, but with focus. I stood up and walked to the small hallway bookshelf, pulling down another folder where I kept my backup drive, scanned bank statements, digital receipts. Then I sat back down, surrounded by documents and history that they'd tried to erase. My phone buzzed beside me. I ignored it at first, but then glanced out of instinct. It was a tag from Zinnia on social media. Against my better judgment, I clicked. It was a photo, a new one, taken just yesterday, apparently. My father, sitting in his favorite chair on the front porch, Lorraine next to him, holding a lemonade, Zinnia standing behind them with Grayson to her left and her 2 daughters on her lap. The caption read, "The Hart legacy lives on, grateful to be surrounded by love, loyalty, and strength." I stared at it. I had been there that day, dropped off that gift, walked that same porch, and yet, no trace of me in the image. I wasn't cropped out. I simply wasn't in it. Not even a blurred elbow or shadow. Like I hadn't existed. A second ping. A comment below the post. "You're the backbone of that family, Zinnia. So inspiring." I didn't feel rage. Not this time. I felt cold. Clarified. I opened the mortgage file again, took a photo of the deed, and started a message to Zinnia. "If I don't belong in your pictures, I don't belong on the deed either." I hit send. She read it within minutes. 3 dots appeared, then vanished. Then a reply. "You're being petty, Ocean. This isn't about you. You're making drama out of nothing." I smiled. Petty. I opened a new tab on my laptop, searched for Julian Park, my attorney, and pulled up our last email chain. Subject: Property Lease Agreement. Attached: a scan of the lease I had allowed my parents to sign under the LLC, month to month, with a 30-day termination clause. I clicked Reply All. Message: Julian, please proceed with notice of termination. Effective immediately. I attached the current photo Zinnia had posted, along with the scan of the updated will I had found in Dad's drawer. Julian replied within 20 minutes. "Understood. We'll file and send courier notice tomorrow. Do you want a courtesy call placed first?" I wrote back one sentence. "No more courtesy." The words felt like silk. Final without fury. By that point, it was late evening. I hadn't eaten, but I wasn't hungry. My body had long since adapted to the discomfort of family-fueled adrenaline. I walked to the window and looked out over the quiet parking lot. Somewhere, someone was laughing through an open balcony door. Kids yelled in the distance. Life, ordinary and unaffected by my small war, kept going. I returned to the couch, reached for the yellow sticky notes again, and wrote a new one. Not for the folder, for me. It read, "You were never petty. You were patient." I stuck it to the lamp beside my bed. Before logging off for the night, I opened my laptop one last time. I didn't go back to Zinnia's post. I didn't need to. I opened the template Julian had once emailed me. Notice of lease termination. Owner copy. I filled in the names. Clayton Hart. Lorraine Hart. 123 Maple Ridge Lane. Then I printed it. As the paper slid out of the tray, warm and unwrinkled, I felt the smallest shift inside me. Not anger, not peace either. Just readiness. I hadn't slept more than an hour. After sending Julian the notice and shutting my laptop, I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling as if it might explain how everything had gotten so warped. I kept turning over the same question. When did helping my family turn into being owned by them? I didn't get an answer. But I did get a notification. It lit up my screen in the early morning gray, barely dawn. Family group chat, Zinnia Hart sent a sticker. I opened it out of habit. It was a cartoon ATM with my face slapped onto it. Someone had clearly edited it, badly, and underneath it read, "Still waiting for the next deposit." There were laughing emojis, a few heart reacts. No one said a word in defense. I stared at it longer than I should have. Not because it surprised me, it didn't, but because I needed to feel the final cut. And there it was. They didn't just take my money, they made a game out of it. A week ago, I might have argued back, asked, "Why would you do that?" or reminded them of everything I'd paid for over the years. The mortgage, Zinnia's hospital bill, Grayson's bail. But now, I knew better. There was no explanation that would undo what they'd already chosen to believe, that I was nothing more than a walking wallet who'd finally snapped. That morning, I didn't respond. I didn't lecture. I started packing. First, I checked my lease, month to month, just like I'd remembered. Then I sent my landlord an email. "I'll be vacating by the end of the week." He replied within an hour, simple and kind. "Understood. I'll send the move-out checklist. Best of luck, Ocean." By midday, I'd cleared the kitchen, boxed up what I needed, and made 3 separate trips to Goodwill. Things I once thought I'd need, like the matching stemware set Mom insisted every woman should own, were shoved into donation bins without a second thought. There was no dramatic playlist in the background, no breakdown in front of a mirror, just motion, focused, clean, determined. By nightfall, I had reduced my life into 10 boxes and 2 suitcases. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding my phone, my finger hovering over contacts. One by one, I deleted every family number. Then I opened the group chat, scrolled, paused at the picture of the ATM sticker, and deleted the entire thread. Then I opened the app settings and turned off group notifications permanently. I didn't announce my departure. I didn't leave a parting message, because goodbyes are for people who cared, and they didn't. The next morning, I took a cab to the Greyhound station downtown. The driver didn't say much, but when he glanced in the rearview mirror and caught sight of my packed bags, he asked, "Starting over?" I nodded. Something like that. He didn't press, just nodded once more, like he'd seen enough people riding off into reinvention to know when not to ask questions. At the station, I bought a one-way ticket to Portland. I didn't check if anyone had texted me on the way, didn't scroll through social media. I just looked out the window and watched as Eugene faded behind me, one cracked sidewalk and overgrown lawn at a time. The ride was quiet, except for the soft rumble of the road and a teenage boy behind me whispering to someone on the phone about how he just needed space. I understood more than he knew. When I arrived in Portland, it was lightly raining, not a downpour, just a fine mist that clung to everything and made the sidewalks glisten. I took a lift to a small apartment complex in the southeast part of town, older but well kept. The building manager, a woman named Darlene, met me outside. "You're Ocean, right?" she asked, holding a clipboard and a set of keys. "Yes," I said. My voice cracked on the word, so I cleared my throat. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she did, but she didn't make a thing of it. "We got lucky. This one just opened up last week, 2nd floor, faces the back, so it's quiet. Come on, I'll show you." As we walked toward the unit, she paused beside a small patch of earth tucked between the parking lot and the staircase. "These lavender bushes?" she said, nudging the base of a hardy-looking plant. "They've been here longer than I have. I tried to dig one out once. It refused to go. Some things survive anything." I nodded again. "I like lavender." She handed me the keys and smiled. "Then you'll like this place." The apartment wasn't fancy, peeling paint near the windows, a dated kitchen tile, creaky floors, but it was mine. I unpacked slowly. Essentials first: bed, coffee maker, towels, no photo frames, no keepsakes, just function. I bought a new set of dishes from a thrift store nearby, mismatched plates and one single teacup, a small act of reclamation. The next evening, after everything was settled, I stood at the window and placed that lone cup on the sill. Not for decoration, not for nostalgia, but as a reminder, not all cups get shattered, some get repurposed. Just as I set it down, my phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. I stared at it for a moment, debating whether to answer. I didn't. Instead, I let the voicemail come through. The message was short. You'll regret walking away. We're not done. There was no name, but I knew the voice. Clayton. He hadn't called to apologize, not to ask how I was, just to remind me that in his world, walking away meant betrayal. I deleted the message. Then I changed my voicemail to a default tone, turned on call screening, and enabled a new setting. Unknown numbers go straight to voicemail. The voicemail was still playing in my head even after I deleted it. His voice, that low, gritted tone he used when he wanted to sound calm but be threatening at the same time. You'll regret walking away. We're not done. As if I had walked out of a conversation instead of decades of manipulation. I turned my phone face down on the counter and stepped into the shower, letting the water run longer than necessary. There was something about rinsing off the residue of that message, something symbolic, even if the hurt didn't wash away so easily. It wasn't even 8 a.m. When I heard another buzz, this one came not through my phone, but through an old coworker's name popping up in a message request. Ocean, are you okay? You're all over Facebook. Just saw something in one of the local forums. I didn't want to believe it was you. I blinked. My stomach dropped, not from fear, but from a cold, growing understanding. I opened my laptop, fingers moving slower than they should have. I typed Hart Family Eugene into the Facebook search bar, and almost immediately, Zinnia's name popped up. She had posted a long, dramatic update to a local community group called Eugene Families United. The post included a picture of Clayton sitting in his recliner, wrapped in a blanket. Lorraine sat beside him, holding his hand like she was auditioning for a sympathy card commercial. The caption read, "My heart aches today. Some of you know my sister, Ocean. She's chosen to cut us off. We've had no contact in weeks. My parents, both in declining health, have been left confused and hurt. After all they gave her, she left. No warning, no help, just gone. I never thought I'd have to post something like this, but if you know her, please encourage her to call home." It had been shared 327 times. Comments poured in. People from the community, old church members, mutual acquaintances, all weighing in like they knew me. How could someone abandon their parents like that? So heartbreaking, praying for your family. Some people just forget where they came from. I scrolled and scrolled until I saw someone post a picture of me from years ago with the caption, "Was this her? I think I remember her from youth group. Quiet girl. Sad to hear this." My face was now a headline in the community I grew up in. I sat down, too stunned to cry, too grounded in reality to let it crush me. They'd taken the public route, turned me into a villain with a few words and a carefully framed image. They knew the power of appearance, Zinnia especially. She'd been building hers for years, but this time, they weren't just sharing family drama. They were weaponizing public shame. By early afternoon, a certified letter arrived at my door. A cream-colored envelope stamped from Lane County Courthouse. I tore it open and read it twice before I allowed myself to believe what I saw. Summons, civil claim, elder neglect, abandonment, filed on behalf of Clayton and Lorraine Hart. The breath in my lungs halted. The date of the hearing was printed in bold near the bottom, less than 2 weeks away. The irony wasn't lost on me. The people who hadn't called to check on me once since that night, the ones who watched a burn blister on my leg without flinching, were now claiming I had abandoned them. I sat on the floor, letter in hand, staring at the word neglect, like it had suddenly grown teeth. Then I stood, walked across the apartment, and opened the drawer marked Legal Financial. Inside was a smaller folder I hadn't touched in years, labeled in my own handwriting, in case I need to remember. I pulled it out, laid it on the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. Before I could second-guess myself, I clicked Julian Park's contact and hit the call button. He answered in 2 rings. "Julian," I said, voice steady. "They've made it public. I'm being served for abandonment." There was a pause. "I saw the post this morning. It's making rounds." "I'm not hiding anymore," I said. "I want everything, all of it laid out. I'll need everything you've got. Bank transfers, housing documents, healthcare payments. The more you have, the stronger we'll build the case." "I have it all," I said. "I've been keeping it." There was pride in his voice when he answered, "Then let's do this right." By evening, I'd scanned over 60 documents, utilities paid, hospital bills covered, credit cards under my name they'd maxed and ignored. I flagged every receipt, every transaction, every screenshot. When I reached the end, I included the photo Zinnia had posted, her smiling face behind my parents' facade of weakness, the same people who claimed they'd been left without help while living rent-free in a house legally owned by me. As I compiled the PDF and clicked Save As, a memory hit me. It was from my mother's funeral years ago. A family friend had leaned in during the visitation, their eyes soft but honest. "You girls were raised to be silent and grateful, but only one of you kept the silence." At the time, I hadn't fully understood what that meant. Now, it echoed through me like a vow. I wasn't silent anymore, not because I needed justice, but because I deserved my story back. I printed the file, 47 pages thick, and placed it into a manila folder, not marked confidential, not hidden away, just labeled Truth. The morning of the hearing, I woke before the alarm. The sky over Portland hadn't yet lightened. Everything still carried that early morning stillness that feels more like suspense than peace. I made a single piece of toast, left it untouched, and stood at the window sipping coffee while watching a neighbor walk her dog in silence. I had my black suit pressed the night before. Nothing fancy, just simple, fitted, and firm. The kind of thing you wear when you're not showing up to ask for justice, but to deliver it. By 8:15, I was in a car heading toward Lane County Courthouse. Julian was already there, having arrived early to check the docket and prep the files. When I stepped out, I saw them before they saw me. Clayton in his tan windbreaker, sitting on a bench just outside the courthouse steps. Lorraine perched beside him, hands folded tight in her lap like she was in church. Grayson paced nearby, scrolling on his phone. They looked up when I walked by, but none of them said a word. There were a few people gathered near the entrance, some holding signs that read things like, "Honor your elders," and "Family first." I didn't flinch, didn't engage. I walked straight through them and up the steps, head held high. They didn't know me, and they didn't know the truth. Inside, the courtroom was neutral and cold, fluorescent lights humming softly above us. The judge hadn't yet entered. A clerk moved papers. Julian greeted me with a nod. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded. "Let's make it count." Zinnia arrived just before the hearing began. She wore a gray blouse with pearl buttons and had her hair pulled into a low bun, eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses like this was some press conference. As the judge entered and we all stood, I felt my hands go still, calm. I wasn't nervous. I was done being nervous. The plaintiffs went first. Zinnia took the stand. Her voice cracked at just the right moments. "She disappeared," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue that remained dry. "My parents were left to fend for themselves. She didn't answer calls, no explanation, no support. I had to step in." Grayson followed. "It felt like we were nothing to her," he mumbled, staring at the table. "She made us feel like burdens." Then came Clayton. He leaned forward, voice heavy. "We raised her. We sacrificed so much. I worked 2 jobs so she could go to school. Lorraine skipped medical appointments to keep food on the table. And now, we're old, we're tired, and she's nowhere." I didn't roll my eyes, didn't even blink. Let them talk. Let them finish the script they'd rehearsed for decades. Then it was our turn. Julian stood, holding a thick file titled Proof of Everything. He approached the stand and placed the folder in front of the judge. "Your Honor," he began, "we'd like to introduce Exhibit A, complete financial documentation of Ocean Hart's continued support of Clayton and Lorraine Hart over the past 5 years. The judge raised an eyebrow and gestured for him to proceed. Inside the file were bank statements showing direct deposits to their joint account utility bills paid monthly by Ocean's auto-debit mortgage paperwork, proving ownership through her LLC. A scanned copy of the lease agreement with her parents as tenants, photos of the burn on her leg, screenshots of the ATM meme and cropped family photo, screenshots of the Facebook post, accusing her of abandonment. I was called to testify next. I took the stand, adjusted the mic, and folded my hands. I've supported my parents since I was 26, I said clearly. Not because they asked, but because I loved them. I paid their mortgage, bought groceries, covered medical bills, helped when they fell behind on property taxes. Julian slid a sheet across the table, hospital receipts in Lorraine's name. I never expected thanks, I continued. But I didn't expect to be erased either. After I said no to one request, everything I did vanished. Suddenly, I became the villain, the one who left. I paused and looked straight at Zinnia. You can't abandon people who were never there for you. You can't neglect people who never needed you until you stopped being useful. The courtroom was silent. Julian rested his hand on the file. We submit this as evidence of consistent, ongoing support. The judge reviewed the folder for a long minute before speaking. I see no evidence of abandonment. In fact, I see more documentation of caretaking than most family members provide under formal agreements. This case is dismissed. I exhaled slowly, not relief, but confirmation. As we gathered our things, the bailiff handed Julian a copy of the dismissal order. Zinnia stood frozen near the rear exit, her phone buzzing in her purse. I knew that sound. It was likely her PR agency, or a reporter, or a client who had just seen the news. Outside, Julian handed me a coffee he'd picked up earlier. You handled yourself well, he said. Most people fall apart on the stand. I stopped falling apart a long time ago, I answered, sipping carefully. Later that week, the fallout rolled in. Clayton received notice from the state. His benefits were being reviewed due to inconsistencies in his declarations. He blamed clerical errors. Grayson had 2 previous debts come back to haunt him, flagged after the court exposed his misuse of credit under false names. And Zinnia, her latest brand partnership pulled out, issuing a public statement that read, "We do not support narratives that undermine truth or integrity." I didn't smile. It wasn't a victory. It was a reckoning. Julian called again a few days later. You want to pursue a defamation case? I thought for a moment. No, I said slowly. Silence was their weapon. Now it's mine. He paused, then simply replied, Understood. I turned off the ringer after that call, not because I was hiding, but because I was finally done explaining myself. After the courthouse, I didn't go out to celebrate. I didn't call anyone. I didn't pour a glass of wine or write a post to share the outcome. I just went home, peeled off my shoes at the door, and let the silence speak for itself. In the weeks that followed, life settled into something I hadn't known in years, steady, undisturbed, and remarkably small in the best way. I taught online workshops a few mornings each week. Financial literacy for women who had been told, like I once was, that money belonged to men. I sipped coffee slowly. I watered the lavender bush outside my apartment, the one Darlene had told me survives anything. I stopped checking my phone for missed calls that would never come. Some nights, I sat by the window and watched the world move on. A couple across the courtyard argued over trash duty. A teen practiced dance moves on the balcony. It all felt distant but grounding. No one from the Hart family reached out. Not after the trial, not after the judgment, not even through a backdoor channel. Their silence wasn't an invitation to reconnect. It was the closing of a chapter they thought they could control until the very last page. Word had made its way through Eugene. Zinnia's social media accounts were scrubbed clean, locked behind privacy walls. Her PR firm quietly removed her from their directory, no official statement released, but the silence louder than any headline. Clayton, I heard, had moved into a one-bedroom over a check-cashing store on 6th Street. The same man who once lectured me about financial responsibility was now walking distance from payday loans and pawn shops. I didn't gloat. That's not how I work. But I didn't forget either. Some lessons aren't meant to make us feel triumphant. They're meant to mark the end of an illusion. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to reorganize the hallway closet. It wasn't cluttered, but something inside me wanted to make space, physically, emotionally. Buried behind a stack of notebooks and an old coat I hadn't worn in years was a faded shoebox. The handwriting on top was unmistakable, my mother's, Ocean, college things. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the late afternoon sun casting a golden haze across the carpet. Inside the box were old ID cards, a lanyard from freshman orientation, and tucked between a folded map of campus buildings and my first rental agreement, a card, cream-colored, slightly bent at the corners. I opened it slowly, recognizing the penmanship immediately. If you ever have to choose between being a good daughter and being a whole person, I hope you choose you. There was no signature. She didn't need one. The words hit harder than anything said in court, not because they were sentimental, but because they were permission. I hadn't realized I'd needed it. I'd been walking around for months, maybe years, carrying the burden of being called selfish, ungrateful, the difficult one. And here, written in cursive ink from a different time, was the truth that had always existed beneath their version of me. She knew. Back then, before all of this, she knew there might come a day when love and survival wouldn't walk the same road. I pressed the card to my chest and sat there until the sun shifted, the room dimming slightly as evening crept in. The next morning, Ariel stopped by with 2 coffees and that half smirk she always wore when she had a story to tell. "I was going through a drawer yesterday," she said, dropping her bag onto the kitchen table. "Found this." She handed me a photo. Us at 17, standing in front of the library, our arms wrapped around each other like we'd never drift. "You're finally in your own picture now," she said. I blinked at her. "What?" She pointed to the wall behind me. I turned. There, pinned to the vision board I'd set up during the first week in this apartment, was a Polaroid. Me, standing beside the lavender bush, Ariel laughing next to me. No parents, no curated smiles, no family expectations. Just 2 women, rooted and real. I smiled. Took me long enough. We sat for a while, sipping coffee and watching the breeze play with the sheer curtain. "Do you think they'll ever apologize?" Ariel asked. I shook my head. Not out loud, maybe not even to themselves. She didn't press. Some answers don't need expansion, they just need peace. Before she left, I pinned my mother's card next to the photo. "If you ever have to choose between being a good daughter and being a whole person," every word still echoed. In the quiet that followed, I looked around the space I now called home, not just 4 walls and a lease, a space untouched by guilt, a space where I didn't owe anyone an explanation for taking up room. I didn't win because they lost. I won because I stopped giving them the power to write my story. Sometimes walking away isn't betrayal, it's survival. This story isn't just about a car loan or a cup of tea. It's about the quiet ways we're conditioned to stay small, to stay useful, to stay silent. But silence is not the same as peace, and loyalty should never cost your voice. Have you ever had to choose between being a good daughter and being a whole person? Let us know in the comments, and if Ocean's story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of quiet strength, justice, and healing.